All right, listeners, welcome back to the Black Male Archives podcast. I'm your host, Rodney Freeman. You can see I'm a little bit under the weather, but I'm still here. I got it. I had to get it in to interview my man Aaron Whitfield. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. It's a beautiful day. How about you?
Oh man, like I said, just a little bit. I have a little one in the house who's giving me his cold. So, but I put some medicine in me. I'm good to go. Yeah, we just wanted to talk to you. You have a podcast called Black Plus Introvert. So and then hear your story about how you got that started. So, if you could tell the listeners where you from and your background.
Yeah, absolutely. I am from Columbus, Ohio, so the Buckeye State, and my background is in youth development and really just family and community development. Also, strong education background. I received a my bachelor's in English literature, Shakespearean studies
Mm,
from Central State University, HBCU. But really, I chose to follow my heart and really go into the community and make my investment. And so if it's involving youth and family, I'm there. And
mhm,
so my podcast, the semi-social life of a Black introvert, that came about really because I was at a point in my life in which I needed to express myself creatively,
mhm,
especially being in my 30s. I found that my 20s sapped all of my creative energy out of me, and
mhm,
being a parent and life hitting me hard. And so, right about the age of about 33, 34, I was like, I need to do something to express where I am right now.
mhm.
And that's when the podcast came about. And so, I've been rocking with it for about ooh, 3 years now, three
Oh
years
wow.
of tales of my life that I'm hoping to pass down not only to listeners, but to my children.
Yeah, yeah, man. So I want to know how you got into the library world before we get into the podcast. How did you get into that?
I was avoiding it. I was avoiding the library world because that was not a space that I found a whole lot of representation.
Mm,
Growing up, I grew up middle class. And so going to the library in my small town of Springfield, Ohio, where I more so grew up, the library was not as welcoming of a place as one might assume.
mm,
It was is very much so the 90s, 80s model of you go in, check out a book, be quiet. It wasn't welcoming. And
mm,
so the library sort of popped up in my life at a time where I needed a job. It was the Great Recession, 2009,
mhm,
2010, 2011. I was beyond broke. And I needed an opportunity, and the opportunity came up at a library that I was familiar with because it was right across the street from my preschool. And I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if I could do the work. But once I went there, I knew I was in my place of purpose.
yeah, yeah. Oh man, I definitely can identify with your story. Um, what do you think kept you going with the library and kept you wanting to come back to it? What was your motivation?
I stayed there for 8 years. 8 years of, I mean, not to be too deep or anything, or go off the fly off the handle, but really it was God. It was
Mm,
God that kept me there. I went there and I found my purpose.
mhm,
And I went there for a job position and walked out with a life purpose.
yeah.
And what I found in working, I was the learning center specialist. And so, as a learning center specialist at this library, I had between 50 and 100 kids per day, 5 days a week after school under my care.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about serving their academic needs. But what I soon realized was also about serving their mental health needs, their social needs.
Mm-hmm.
And once I saw these beautiful brown faces, I mean, the majority of the kids were either Black or African, large number were New American, kids from Somalia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya. Like, once I saw their faces,
Mm-hmm.
I knew what to do.
Yeah.
And so I created community and family. And it took some time, but we did some beautiful things at that library.
What did this position teach you about yourself?
This position taught me. how to really be, how to trust myself, how to walk at my own pace.
Mm-hmm.
Because here's the deal. My team and I, we created something beautiful
Mm-hmm.
in a space that was not used to that type of investment, which brought about conflict. You know, when
Mm-hmm.
you go about your job, one thing is to have a job, but another thing is to have a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes people that just have their job position don't move with the same pace of people who are operating in their life purpose.
Yeah.
And so, you know, being a person of excellency, being a person of vision, of drive, my success brought about conflict, but I had to stay within my pace. I had to
Yeah.
sometimes do things that I knew were right,
Mm-hmm.
stand up for my students, stand up for my community,
Mm-hmm.
and protect my kids. And I say my kids because I mean that. I've been removed from that job for about a year. The pandemic shut down the library for about a year too. So it's been 2 years since I've really been involved with that program.
Yeah.
Those kids still contact me.
Yeah.
We still
Mm.
have that connection because of the work and the investment that we put in with them.
Yeah. That means, and that says a lot when, you having that relationship and they still contact you and reach out to you, you know, that,
It,
that says a lot.
it says so much because I'm at a major college, and university now, and the kids, some of the kids go to the college university and they drop by my office,
Yeah.
or they'll give me a call and say, Mr. Aaron, a couple students, they're from Kenya. They spend a lot of time in the Kenyan refugee camp, and
Mm.
we've known each other for 8 years. Some of
Mm.
the most beautiful, talented people I've ever met, and they call me about once every couple of months, and they ask me from a daughter's perspective to their father, tell me something about me that I don't see.
Mm. Mm.
And it's like that's the connection. That's
Yeah.
the family. We're of different cultures, different religious backgrounds, different environment. We're different, but we have that human connection, and that's
Yeah.
what we built.
Yeah. Man, that's solid, man. So, okay. So tell me then, how'd you get this podcast started? And was your work dealing with youth, one of the reasons why you got that started? Or how did you get that started?
Huge catalyst as to why why the podcast started. The podcast came about during a time where I needed to creatively express myself.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the stories that I would sit down and tell, whether it be my children or the stories I would tell the kids in the library, I found that was almost the material for the podcast.
Okay.
And so this is almost like my if I were to pass down stories, or if I were giving someone a verbal account of my life and my perspective along with my voice, here's my podcast.
Okay.
And so the kids in the library, I mean, quite frankly, they still listen to the podcast.
Mm.
Even if we're not connected within the same space, they still listen to it, they still comment, they still give me a call. And so the podcast was inspired by stories that I would pass down to my children.
Mm-hmm.
And in working with some of the kids at the library who may not have a father, or who I may be a father figure or an uncle or a friend, or heck, I'm old now, grandfather. These are the stories I will pass down to them,
Yeah.
and stories that they can take on the go. So that was a lot of the inspiration behind it.
And why do you call it intro? I mean, I understand the title, but do you look at yourself as an introvert? And what is that? Is yeah, what is that?
So as an introverted people typically are people who we are the quiet ones in the room, typically looked as like the quiet, more wallflower people in the room, but really it's we're the people who need to recharge by ourselves.
Mm,
And so, people have a hard time sometimes believing that I'm an introvert,
mm,
especially when my work's in the community and just what I do within youth and family. That's when I know that I'm in my place and my purpose, when I can operate with youth and family and community. But that
yeah.
takes a lot out of me. So I need my recharge time. And so I named it the semi-social life of a Black introvert because, Black people are sometimes stereotyped as being the loud, boisterous, life of the party types. I'm not that. I'm not the life of the party. but I will bring life to a party. That's why I'll bring some
Mm.
life to it.
Right.
And so my perspective on life is different. My perspective on a lot of things are different because it's coming from a Black introvert that's just trying to make his way through life.
Mm, 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 mm. So tell me about this new position that you have and what you're able to bring your talent and skills as a librarian. How are you able to kind of intertwine those skills into what you're doing currently?
Yeah, so much of my library experience, especially as being involved with the youth as a learning center specialist, I'm translating those skills into the university setting, dealing with kids who are a bit older, students who are a bit older, but face the same challenges. I had the privilege of working with, as I mentioned, incredible kids from over
Hmm.
25 different nations. They are so smart and so intelligent, but the one thing that they lacked at times was belief. They
Mm,
could have a 4.0 GPA, but because they live in a certain world or environment, they may have a 1.0 self-esteem.
mm,
And so my job is to help invest in them, is to pour into them, is to
mhm,
encourage them, is to love them, is to direct them and to guide them to build that self-esteem up. There's very little that I could really teach them academically. I mean, calculus is not my thing, chemistry is
mhm,
not my thing,
mhm.
but let me teach you about life. And
Yeah.
so I've really brought that to a university setting, making the choice to see, yes, they're students, but they're people.
Hmm.
And I work predominantly with Black men,
Hmm.
which is another interesting sort of group of people to work with
Yeah.
at a university setting, at a predominantly white university setting. And so my job is just to create programs and curriculum
Hmm.
that appeal to their academic needs, sure, but also their mental health needs, their
Hmm.
social needs, and just develop them into, holistic human beings.
And I love the fact that you're a librarian, but you're using your skill set in a different way. Can you talk to the types of positions that are out there for, because I know there are a lot of people, myself included, who used to be a librarian but have this specialized skill set that can be used in other different fields. When you were when you were looking for another position or looking for transitioning to something else, how did you see your skills being utilized in these other fields?
Yeah,
Did you see? Yeah.
I made a choice, and it took it took being like 34 to
Mhm.
really understand that I am way more purposeful than when I am positional.
Mhm. Mhm.
I can create my purpose. My purpose really is to help and encourage people and to invest in people. I
Yeah.
would do that whether I'm at my job position or I'm at the grocery store or I'm at home, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And so at the beginning, in the middle of the day, that's just who I am.
Mhm.
And so I realized in working at the library and working in that academic center,
Mhm.
I realized my one of my gifts is to bridge people and to
Mhm.
create community.
Mhm.
And that's something that I uniquely have.
Yeah.
And so once I realized that gift, like, oh, not everybody has this, and oh, this is pretty unique to me, the
Yeah.
Black introvert, I can bring that anywhere. So whether it's a library setting, a university setting, community setting, I'm going to bridge people together. And
Yeah.
so I'm grateful for my library experience with that.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that you're saying is that you just found your purpose and the skill set that you
Mhm.
have, you're just using those skills to advance your purpose.
I found the purpose and I found belief in my purpose.
Mm.
I found, I would like to think that I taught the kids a lot, and I'm sure I did.
Yeah.
But truth be told, they taught me so much about myself.
Yeah.
They when I didn't have confidence in the power as to who I was and what I brought to the table, I remember very clearly kids in the library coming up to me and just thanking me for what I do. And
Yeah.
I would brush it off like, oh, no problem. And one time, a girl who's probably about 8 years old, she told me, she's like, you're really helping me. I was like, thank you. She's like, no, you don't understand.
Yeah.
And she and her 8-year-old, 9-year-old self got me told and got me together.
Yeah.
And I had to learn how to take compliments. I had to learn how to take their encouragement. The same encouragement I was giving out,
Yeah.
I had to learn how to take it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so many wonderful things happened within that space. I could write a book about it. Maybe one day I will. But that whole experience is creating community, understanding my purpose, understanding my gifts and my talents. I could translate that anywhere.
Man, that is awesome. Can you tell the listeners about some of the projects that you're doing right now, or some of the ones that you might have coming down the pipe?
Absolutely. So, taking some of this experience from the library and just my life experience, I started a curriculum and a training guide for people who are working in libraries, specifically with youth and more specifically with youth of color. And so I have a training manual on how to create community within a library setting. I would love to travel and talk, to libraries across the nation and provide tools as to this is how you make that community feel, especially libraries that may not have or that may be experiencing trouble with youth and teens.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to come out and support and train and provide tools. But, and so that's what I do as far as my personal and professional business. But also, just in a university setting, this pandemic has really taken a lot of youth of color and students of color. And so I am creating mental health programs for our college students who need to experience life outside the classroom, who need to sometimes cry some tears, who need a hug, who need a high five, or who need a space to talk and communicate and to build those sort of social bonds. And so I'm creating a whole lot of mental health programming for the students at the university in which I work.
Man, that is awesome stuff, man. Where can listeners follow you and find you on social media?
Yes, they can follow me on Instagram at Black+Introvert Podcast. That is Black+Introvert Podcast. My podcast, The Semi-Social Life of a Black Introvert, is on every major streaming service. So Spotify, Apple, Google, I'm there. You will see my voice or hear my voice and see my face. But also follow me on my website too, which is I Am Mufali, which is IAMMUFALI.com. IamMufali.com. And that is where I have my training services, some of my blogs, just, random dots on life. And so definitely, show up there, hit me up with an email, and I would definitely respond back.
Sir, this has been a great pleasure to interview you and talk to you about your library skills, your purpose that you found, and I'm so glad that we had the honor to interview you. Aaron Whitfield, thank you so much for being on the Black Male Archives podcast, where we capture, curate, and promote positive stories about Black men, which you are one of. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Awesome.